Hey YouTubers, it's Judy from Wildly Passionate, and today we're going to be testing different kinds of paper to use with Copics. On the screen you can see the specific Copic colors I used, and we're going to go through and test each paper with the same two tests. One where I use a colorless blender to blend, and one where I do not use the colorless blender. So here you can see the Graphics 360. Up next we have Layout Bond paper by Strathmore, and if you didn't notice, I'm going to be going through all the papers organized by their weight or how thick they are. So we're starting out with the thinnest papers. I think I have 5 kind of thin papers, and these work a little bit different than a heavier paper like a Bristol. Here we have regular printer paper, which is very easy to get, but is not my favorite for Copics. As you can see, it bleeds a lot, and yeah, so if you want to wait until the end of the video, I will be writing down all my conclusions and discussing what I think works best, but it is up to personal preference, so I mean, however you work might be different from how I work with Copics, so draw whatever conclusions you need to from that. And here we have heavyweight drawing paper by the B Paper Company. Here you can see I'm using the Mixed Media XL paper by Canson. Okay, moving on to some thicker papers. Here's a Bristol with the smooth surface by Strathmore. This is something that I have used a lot with Copics, and currently it's my preference of what I like to use. It's pretty easy to get at the art supply stores or Michael's, that kind of thing, and it performs pretty well. It can take a beating, so I might be a little biased, but so far that one's my favorite. Here we have another Strathmore paper. This is their mixed medium paper from the 400 series with the vellum surface, which has a little bit more texture than the smooth surface. And just to note, none of these thicker papers in this part of the video actually bled through onto the paper beneath. Here I wanted to try a watercolor paper, so I'm using hot press, which has the smoothest surface and is least likely to ruin your Copics. This is by the brand Fluid 100. This paper actually absorbed the Copics very different from any of the other papers, and I feel like the colors looked richer maybe on this paper. This was a paper that's totally new to me that I bought just for this video. It's the illustration paper by Canson, and it's called Fanboy. I don't really know why it has that name, but Fanboy illustration paper has a little bit more tooth or texture to the paper than the Bristol, than the smooth. And our last paper for today is actually a 2-ply paper by Strathmore, and it's the Bristol with the vellum surface in the 400 series. This is a pretty thick paper, but it does have a lot of texture on the surface of the paper. So if you're interested in my personal conclusions on these papers, please keep watching. First, really quickly, I just want to cover some of the terms that I use and what I mean by them when I'm deciding on what makes a good or not so good paper. So the texture refers to the surface of the paper and how the marker kind of slides across it. Bleeding is when the ink goes over the line where you apply the marker, so it actually kind of spreads out onto the paper. Seepage, I kind of made that word up. I don't know if it really means this, but it's if the ink soaks straight through the paper and onto the paper beneath, so you'd have to always be using multiple sheets of paper when you're using your Copics. And lifting is when you re-wet the Copic ink on the paper. Does it sort of lift up and lighten and sort of move around, which might shift how the color looks? So it's sort of when you rework any area, will it change a lot? And if an area is splotchy, it just means that it's a very uneven application of the marker and it doesn't look very smooth. So we're going to be starting off with the Graphics 360 marker paper by Bindfang, and I think this paper has a little bit of texture that makes the surface look bumpy. The texture doesn't show up great in these photographs. I don't know why, but it looks sort of like a grainy photograph, which might be a look you're going for or might not. For me, I don't love it. I prefer a smooth surface when I am drawing with Copics. So also the marker didn't blend all that well together. It's not horrible, but it's not great either. Next, we have the Layout Bond paper by Strathmore. This paper did blend really, really well. However, almost a deal breaker for me is if the marker bleeds a lot, because then you almost have no control over where your marker ends up. And if you have a inked illustration, you have specific areas you want the marker to be in, and it's pretty much a deal breaker for me. So I did not love this one. Here we have regular old printer paper, and as expected, this one bleeds a lot. It seeps through to the surface beneath, and it might be okay for a good quick sketch, but I wouldn't use it for a final illustration. It does blend okay. It's kind of smooth surface, but I prefer something a little thicker and more durable. Here we have the heavyweight drawing paper by B Paper Company, and this one bled a little bit, not as much as the other ones. But the texture of it really bothered me. It's sort of a rougher surface, which worries me about my Copics because I think you can wear out the nib pretty quick that way. And I felt like this just sort of sucked up the ink really fast, and it wasn't very blendable. Like you can see in the sphere, it just looks stripy. So this was not my favorite either. Here we have the Canson Mixed Media XL paper. This one I felt like really made the way I applied the marker look splotchy, and I really don't like that. It kind of ruins the whole effect of a smooth blend. So that's pretty much a deal breaker for me. This one really doesn't seem like it's made for Copics. You might be able to get by with some thin layers, but I really didn't like this one. Here we have the Bristol and the Smooth Surface by Strathmore, and this is what I tend to gravitate towards when I'm using Copics because it's very durable and it can take a lot of layers, and it's not too expensive, so I like the Smooth Surface. It only bleeds a little bit, and there's just a slight texture which I feel like absorbs the color pretty well, and it doesn't distract too much. This is the Mixed Media paper by Strathmore with the vellum surface, and as I said before, the vellum surface has a little bit more texture, so I don't love it, and it bleeds a little bit, not too much, but I didn't really love the blend I got on this paper, and if I can avoid a heavily textured paper, I will. This is the hot press watercolor paper, which was quite a surprise to me. It had the absolute smoothest, most buttery surface. However, it bled a lot, which was really disappointing because the blending I got from color to color was really pretty smooth, but it bleeds way outside the lines, which is basically unacceptable to me. So I was really disappointed in that. And when I went back to rework the area, it kind of lifted it up out of the paper in a strange way. This is the Fanboy illustration paper by Canson, and as you can see in the sphere, when I used a bunch of layers of Copic, you got to see the texture of the paper a little bit more and it looks a little grainy. However, if you look at the area where I didn't use the colorless blender underneath, it's much more smooth and it acts a lot like the Bristol to me. So I was pretty impressed with the paper. I just know that I couldn't use too many layers in any one area. And for our final paper, we have the Strathmore Bristol with the vellum surface. And this paper is 2-ply, which I believe means that it's like two pieces of paper stuck together, so it's extra thick. And there was no seepage through to the other side. So it has a really nice feel. It's very thick. However, it bled a lot, which I thought was strange because regular Bristol doesn't bleed that much. So I was disappointed. The bleeding basically made it totally out of the running for me. So, which paper did I love the most, and which will I continue to use with my Copics? Stay tuned. It actually turned out to be a tie for me. There are two papers that I really quite liked. The first is the Bristol Smooth. I might be biased, as I said, but I have the most experience with this paper and I like how it works. The other paper I thought really performed well was the Fanboy illustration paper by Canson. So I hope you liked the video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. Stay tuned next week for another video. Take care and stay passionate.